There are collections that look from the outside like the eccentricities of an unusual person. The mountain communities of Appalachian, North Carolina in the 1890s had their share of unusual people, people whose solitary lives and singular preoccupations were accommodated within the broad tolerance that rural communities extend to individuals who are useful, harmless, and not too difficult to explain to strangers. Hester Bale of Yancey County was accommodated on those terms for nearly 2 decades before the accommodation failed. She was known as a healer of secondary reputation, not the first person called when illness was serious, but useful for minor complaints, for children's fevers, for the management of persistent pain in the joints and limbs that mountain life produced in the people who lived it long enough. She was known for her knowledge of plants and her willingness to sit with the dying. She was also known, in the particular private way that mountain communities know things they have decided not to discuss openly, for the collection. The collection was in her house, in a room she did not show to visitors, and the community's knowledge of it had accumulated through glimpses over years. A window seen through at the wrong angle, a child who had wandered into the wrong hallway and come back out saying something a parent immediately hushed. No one went looking until 1897, when the death of a man named Harlan Webb produced a particular set of circumstances that finally gave the county something to look at directly. Tell me where you are watching from tonight and drop it in the comments, because the county of Yancey, North Carolina is a real place in the mountains above the Tow River, and the house Hester Bale lived in stood on a specific road in a specific community, and the collection she maintained in that house was not, when the investigation finally opened the room, what anyone in the county had imagined when they allowed themselves to imagine it at all. Yancey County in the 1890s was a high-elevation farming and mining community pressed into the Black Mountain Range in the eastern part of the Great Smoky System. The Tow River ran through it, cold and fast, and the communities along its tributaries were small and self-contained in the way of mountain settlements everywhere in that period and region. Hester Bale had been in one of those communities, a settlement called Bald Creek, up a tributary of the same name, since at least 1879, when she first appears in county records. She was listed in the 1880 census as female, age 31, unmarried, residing alone. She was listed in 1890 in the same household, described the same way with the same address. She had been there long enough that the community had stopped registering her as a newcomer and had absorbed her into the category of permanent fixtures, people whose presence is simply part of the landscape, unremarkable because uninterrupted. She was a small woman, dark-haired, with quick and certain hands in the way of people who work with fine detail. Her knowledge of plant medicine was acknowledged to be genuine. She produced results in minor cases that were documented through the testimonies of families who had used her services over years. What was less documented, and what surfaced gradually through the investigation of 1897, was the means by which she maintained the depth and specificity of that knowledge. Because the plant medicine was only part of what Hester Bale used when she sat with patients, there was a diagnostic element to her practice that she did not describe to the families she treated, and that the families did not think to question because the results were adequate and the questions would have been impolite. The diagnostic element involved the collection. Harlan Webb died in March 1897 of causes the county physician listed as heart failure following a long illness. Hester Bale had been treating Webb for approximately 18 months before his death, attending him at his home and, in the last weeks of his illness, sitting with him through the night shifts that his family could not sustain on their own. She was, in the community's accounting, a woman who had done her duty and done it well. The family was grateful. The funeral was attended by the normal community and conducted without incident. The incident came 3 weeks later when Webb's wife, a woman named Polly Webb, went to retrieve something from her husband's bedside table and found, in the back of the drawer, a small folded cloth that had not been her husband's and that, when she unfolded it, contained a tooth. A human tooth, clearly extracted rather than lost naturally, cleaned and dry. She recognized it, after a moment, as one of her husband's teeth. She recognized it because Harlan Webb had broken that particular tooth in an accident in 1891, and it had been extracted by the county dentist in Burnsville, and Polly Webb had been present and remembered the specific tooth clearly. It had been in her husband's mouth in 1891. It was in a folded cloth in a drawer in 1897 that had not been there before Hester Bale's visits, and was there now that Hester Bale's visits had ended. Polly Webb went to the county sheriff. The sheriff, a man named Marcus Bunn, who had been in the position for 8 years and who was, by his own account in a report written to the state attorney general's office in April 1897, not a man easily surprised by what his county produced, was surprised by what the subsequent investigation of Hester Bale's house produced. He applied for and received a warrant to search the premises on April 2, 1897. He took 2 deputies and the county physician, a man named Dr. Forsyth Lamb, who had been practicing in Yancey County long enough to have developed the practical stoicism of a man who has seen most of what the human body can do. Dr. Lamb's stoicism, as documented in his personal journal, was tested by what the search of the Bale house found in the back room. The collection was organized. That was the detail that both Bunn and Lamb returned to in their separate accounts of the search, not the size of it, not the nature of it, but the organization. The room contained a series of wooden cases, each fitted with divided compartments, each compartment holding a single tooth or a pair of teeth, each compartment labeled with a name and a date in Hester Bale's handwriting. The labels were consistent and clear. The dates spanned 17 years, from 1880 through the most recent edition in the winter of 1897. The names, when Bunn spent the afternoon of April 2nd reading through them, were the names of people he knew, people who lived in Bald Creek and the adjacent communities, people who had used Hester Bale's services over those 17 years, people who were alive and people who were dead. The collection was not sorted by living or dead. It was sorted by year of acquisition. The count was documented in Bunn's report, 214 individual teeth, representing a minimum of 148 distinct individuals identified by the labels, spanning 17 years of practice as a healer in Yancey County. The living individuals whose names appeared in the collection numbered 63. The remaining 85 were deceased at the time of the search, some recently and some years prior. Hester Bale was arrested at her home that evening. She was calm. She did not express surprise at the search. She did not deny that the collection was hers or that the organization was her work. She said when Bunn asked her what the collection was for, that it was the record of her practice and that without the record she could not maintain the practice at its necessary level. She said each tooth was a point of ongoing contact with the person from whom it came. She said the contact was necessary for the diagnostic component of her work, that she maintained an awareness of the health of everyone in the collection, and that this awareness was what made her treatments more effective than those available from other healers. She said this the way a physician might explain the necessity of patient records. She said it with the professional certainty of a person describing a system that worked and whose workings were entirely clear to her. She was charged with unlawful taking of human body parts, a charge the county attorney assembled from the combination of statutes available and tried in October 1897. The trial was brief. The collection was submitted as evidence. The labels were read into the record. The families of living individuals named in the collection were notified. Their responses, as documented by Bunn's subsequent reports, ranged from horror to a particular kind of retroactive unease. The unease of people who had found Bale's treatments effective, and who were now reviewing what effective had meant in light of what the treatment involved without their knowledge. Dr. Forsyth Lamb testified about the nature of the collection and about what, in his professional assessment, ongoing contact with an extracted tooth could or could not provide in terms of medical information about its former owner. His testimony was careful. He said that in Western medicine no such mechanism existed or was theoretically supported. He said that he could not, from his professional training, rule out a mechanism he was not familiar with. He said this carefully enough that it appeared in the trial record without the judge striking it, though the judge noted in his summary that the court was not in a position to assess the validity of folk medical claims and that the assessment was not relevant to the charges. Hester Bale was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in the state prison. She served 20 months. She was released in 1899. She did not return to Yancey County. She does not appear in census or vital records for North Carolina, Tennessee, or Virginia in any year following her release. She was 50 years old when she was released. No subsequent record of her has been found. The collection was retained as evidence through the trial and then, according to the county clerk's records, transferred to the state's custody. The North Carolina State Archives has a record of receiving materials from the 1897 Bale case. The materials are listed as Artifact Collection, Human Dental, comprising 214 items. The collection is held in a storage facility associated with the archive. It is not on public display. Access has not been requested through any formal petition that the archive has logged. The 148 people whose teeth are in those wooden cases, 63 of them still living when the search was conducted, all of them dead now. Their teeth organized in Hester Bale's wooden cases in a state archive storage facility had their diagnostic contact maintained by Hester Bale's understanding of her own practice from the moment of extraction until the moment she was arrested. Whether the contact ended with the arrest or whether the organization of the collection, the labels, the dates, the careful compartments, constitutes a kind of maintenance that continues in the absence of its creator, is a question that no court has addressed and no document has answered. Polly Webb, who started this investigation by finding a tooth in a bedside drawer, died in 1931. Her husband's tooth is in the collection. Whether it was returned to her or to his family, or whether it remained in the case alongside the other 213, is not documented in any available record. What Hester Bale was maintaining contact with, and what that contact produced in people who did not know they were in contact with her, is the question this case generates that nothing in the available record answers. The collection exists, the labels are still on the compartments, and somewhere in a state archive storage facility in North Carolina, 148 people who have been dead for decades are still organized by year of acquisition in cases that the woman who built them described as a record of ongoing practice. Drop your answer in the comments. Was Hester Bale a healer who had developed a system that worked by whatever mechanism and that the law could only address through the most available applicable statute? Or was she something else entirely? Something that the folk medicine framework she operated within was not fully adequate to contain or explain? The cases in the wooden compartments are still organized. The labels are still clear. And the system, whatever it was maintained for 17 years without a single person in Bald Creek understanding what the treatments they found effective had actually required. There is a detail in Dr. Forsyth Lamb's personal journal that his testimony at the trial carefully avoided. He was a professional and he understood what belonged in court testimony and what belonged in a private journal, and he maintained that distinction throughout his career with the discipline of a man who had learned where the line was by watching other men cross it. What he wrote in his journal on the evening of April 2, 1897, after the search of the Bale house, is not court testimony. It is a private account of a physician who has spent the day in a room that surprised him and who is processing the surprise in the only tool he has available, which is the journal he has maintained for 20 years of practice in a county that had given him most things he expected and a few things he had not. He writes that when he examined the collection, he did so with the clinical attention he would bring to any evidence examination. He moved through the wooden cases systematically. He read the labels. He noted the organization. He made his professional observations about the physical condition of the teeth themselves, which were uniformly clean and dry and showed no deterioration inconsistent with the years indicated on the labels. And then, he writes, He reached a case dated 1889 that contained a single tooth labeled with a name he recognized as a man who had been his patient, a man he had treated for a chest condition in 1888 and 1889, a man whose treatment he had considered adequate and whose subsequent improvement he had attributed to the treatment. The man was still alive. His name was in Hester Bale's collection, in a compartment labeled with the year she had acquired his tooth, in a case in a locked room in a house in Bald Creek. Lamb writes that he stood at that case for a longer period of time than the clinical examination required. He writes that he was attempting to determine whether he had missed something in 1888 and 1889, whether there was an element of his patient's treatment that had involved Bale, of which he had been unaware, that had contributed to the improvement he had credited to his own work. He writes that he could not determine this from the tooth in the case. He writes that he intended to speak with the patient in question about whether he had received any treatment from Bale concurrent with the physician's own treatment. He writes that he did not, in the end, have that conversation. He writes, "I decided that the man was healthy and that he had been healthy since 1889, and that introducing the question of what Hester Bale's role in that recovery might have been was not something I was willing to do to a healthy man who had moved on from the illness. I decided this was the doctor in me. I am not entirely certain it was not also the coward. That passage has not been published. Forsyth Lamb's journal is in private family hands, according to a Yancey County Genealogical Society inquiry made in 1993. The family confirmed the journal existed. They confirmed it was in good condition. They declined to allow access to it or to donate it to any public collection, saying that Dr. Lamb had expressed in conversation with family members that the journal was private and that his wishes should be respected. The Genealogical Society's correspondent noted this in her inquiry report and filed it, and it is in the Society's records, and it describes a journal in private hands that contains, on a specific evening in April 1897, the private thoughts of a man who stood for longer than necessary at a case of teeth in a dead woman's back room, and decided afterward not to ask the question he should probably have asked. That journal is the closest thing to a full account of what was in the collection and what it meant in practice that is known to exist. It is in private hands. It may or may not survive. The family declines access. And the name of Forsyth Lamb's patient, the man whose tooth was in the 1889 case, the man whose recovery Lamb had credited to himself and who may have been receiving a second form of treatment without his knowledge, is not in any available record, because Lamb declined to put it there. The collection in the North Carolina State Archives has 214 teeth, 148 names, 63 people who were alive when the search was conducted and who did not know they were in a case in Hester Bale's back room. One of them was a man whose doctor stood at his tooth in April 1897 and chose not to ask him a question that might have changed how he understood the years since his recovery. If this case is the kind that stays with you, subscribe. There are more of them. The archived collections are not empty. The mountains keep their records. Some of them are in wooden cases with very clear labels.